My name is Fred LeFranc. I am the founder of Results Through Strategy. My title is Chaos Strategist, and this relates to the fact that I think we live in a world that's going through a lot of disruption. Let me introduce the panelists. And before I do, be aware that we are recording this. We are going to send you copies of this, and you are able to ask questions as some of you already have done through the panel on the side of your screen. So let me start off by having Jim Greco introduce himself.
Yes, hi everyone. I'm Jim Greco, former CEO of Sbarro, before that CEO of Bruegger's. Since leaving Sbarro, I have been consulting, been doing a lot of work mainly for private equity firms, most recently with a concept acquired by a private equity firm called Nuke's Eatery. Before that, my background was in in food manufacturing. I have a JD and an undergraduate degree in economics, and happy to be here.
Great. And Benny?
Yes, good afternoon, everyone. This is Benny Allmore. I've had 31 fantastic years in the Burger King brand, where I started out of Baton Rouge, Louisiana. I went to many markets with Burger King Corporation and turned those markets around. And since then, I'm a franchisee of 46 restaurants that had a great turnaround story in the last couple of years, which I'll be glad to share with you on this call.
All right, great, fantastic. So let's get started on it. So I use this as a metaphor. We live in a very whitewater world, and if any of you have ever been whitewater skiing, whitewater rafting, I should say, excuse me, you know that you go from a class 1 wave, which is roll your boat, to a class 5 wave. Oh my God, I'm going to die. And one of the things about whitewater rafting is that you cannot control the current. You can't control anything except attempt to influence the raft. You can't even really control the raft. And a lot of companies understand this because there's so many things that are buffeting us from the outside world that creates problems. Likewise, we may have challenges internally with our teams that if they're not cooperating, not aligned, and that's part of what we're going to discuss today in terms of turnaround situations. And I'd like to set the stage in terms of the environment that we're operating within. This is a list of just some of the few companies that have gone bankrupt in the last 18 months. And while you may look at the list and say, well, some of these are older brands, they probably should have gone away, or there's categories here like buffets that aren't no longer relevant or popular with people, that's not the whole story. And of course, these are just the companies that had no choice but to ultimately go bankrupt. There are a lot of companies who have closed dozens and hundreds of restaurants. Ruby Tuesday comes to mind as an example. And now we have the issue where you have people who are in really stressed and they don't know what to do. And so all of us on this call are going to end up in somehow at a turnaround situation. Even if it's going well, there'll be turnaround moments. So we're going to try and give you some insight in terms of how to approach this as you move forward to make sure you don't make mistakes that people do when they don't understand it. I'm going to share some quick financial graphs to give you a sense of where the industry is at right now. This is from the NAPTRAC, and NAPTRAC, along with Black Box Intelligence, track an index of members companies that are definitely going through some challenges. So NAPTRAC is showing you here. This is an annualized number. You look at the trough in 2009, the depth of the recession, what had gone on. 2008 wasn't much better. The gray bars are the traffic, and the dark red line is the same store sales. Now, we saw that it bounced back up, hip, hip, hooray, everything's going great. And I know in some of the work that we were doing at Results Through Strategy in 2007, 8, and 9, everyone said, oh my God, I need a lot of help. And then when things started getting better, they said, well, everything's fine. I don't need any more help. Well, look what happens in 2013. We saw a decline, a slight bounce back, and we're back down a decline in 2016. So companies can never really afford and stop innovating it somehow. And that's one of the things that we're concerned about. This now is the NAPTRAC the monthly casual dining trend, a little bit more granularity to see exactly what's going on month by month by month by month, and it's really challenged. You'll notice the very last entry shows a slight uptick in same-store sales. However, traffic is still down, and that's primarily because of price increases. And we've learned the hard way that price increases do not fix a problem. It exacerbates it. It really hides it a little bit. This is Black Box Intelligence, their monthly trend, very similar to NAPTRAC. I'll show you that one, and you can look at this one. Very, very similar trend. Different companies make this up. Slightly worse performance in most recent months. I introduced this slide here because I think it's fascinating. Fast casual as a category has been discussed as the great savior of the industry. You even have casual dining chains that have started developing fast casual brands. So I've always maintained that serving bad food faster doesn't solve your problem. But this is without Chipotle, and you can see a fairly significant decline. In fact, this morning, Pi 5 announced they were closing, I think, 20% of their stores. And so even in a high flyer for a long time is starting to see some erosion. One of the reasons I believe is because private equity firms have been buying these small fast casual chains, pumping them full of cash and saying grow. And they are, but they're not growing responsibly. There's cannibalization. Everyone's trying to get into the same center, and it can see it's really created a problem. So what in God's name are we supposed to do about it? How do you get your head around this kind of challenge? And that's really what the big difficulty is that's going on. So I'm showing this quick visual graphic to help you understand how we see brands move to concepts from an intangible to a tangible level. At the intangible side, a brand vision of why you exist. And this is a big issue for the older casual dining brands. In many cases, they've gone through 10, 15, 20 CEOs. They forgot a long time ago the entrepreneur's vision that started them in terms of why they exist and who they serve, the purpose that they have, the positioning against the competition, the personality for the brand, as well as the promise. And I like to use the example of Chick-fil-A. Chick-fil-A is an older brand, but they remain very relevant, and they speak with a very consistent brand voice. And that's not found in a lot of companies, not that all companies advertise in terms of what they do. The other issues to keep in mind that whatever you start doing as a point of differentiation eventually becomes the price of entry, because people will copycat it. And if you're not continuing to innovate, you lose position by the fact that you're standing still and people are passing you by. If you think about the budget steak category, on the West Coast, Black Angus had been around for years. They theoretically were the best position to take advantage of the advent of cheap steaks in the 80s. But they stood still, and then concepts like Outback Steakhouse, Lone Star, came in and just grabbed tremendous market share and grew in size to a gigantic scale compared to them. Let's get down to the tangible level. When we get down tangible, and I look at the 4 buckets of marketing, the financial model, concept, execution, and culture, we start with marketing. And the messaging is messaging internal and external through your menu, through the 4 walls, social media, and advertising. And that messaging comes through the brand voice that I mentioned earlier. And when we work with companies, we spend a lot of time of getting clarity around the vision and purpose of the brand so that everything else follows that and has complete alignment. The financial model. What's the sales to investment ratio? What's really going on with the numbers? What's your staffing grid look like? In the recession, people were cutting back on staff, eliminating positions like hostesses and bussers, thinking they'd get away with it. Service suffered, traffic went down. So it's a real slippery slope. The menu pricing versus the promotion pricing is critical. If you're not charging a value offering on your menu that requires you to do promotional pricing, when I mean promotional pricing, it's not like an LTO with some a good price. It's when people do 2-for-1s or 2 for $30 or 3 for $30 and all the variations that we've all seen. You're basically telling people you're not worth what you're charging, and then you get into more trouble, and it's a real slippery slope. Jim, do you have any comments on the financial model since you're financially oriented on this?
I think that it's just really important in a turnaround situation to have visibility. And the last item, bullet you have on there, financial controls, kind of references that. You need to know you need to know and project out for at least 3 months what your cash situation is like and what your P&L forecast is.
All right, thank you. So concept execution is what most people call operations. And the reason I don't call it operations, or if you insist on keeping operations in there, call it operations with intention. That to me is what concept execution is. Because if you can follow the trend that the brand has to have a personality and a performance and a positioning in the competitive landscape, then how you execute your concept must be unique to you. We all have servers, bartenders, bussers, counter help, cooks. But what makes that employee who works in your brand different than the same title at the restaurant next door? And that is the actual concept execution. That is the expression of the brand. And so we'll do a lot of mapping of guest journey and the employee journey. We have a webinar on our website for both of these that explains to you exactly what a guest journey and employee journey is. And that's where we map out the emotional and physical things that people must experience in order to become loyal fans. And then, of course, price value as relates to the brand is the formula we always use, which is the food plus the beverage plus the service plus the environment over price equals value. And that's how this is done in concept execution. And lastly, but most importantly, is the culture. Who are we as leaders? Will people follow us because we provide clarity, we express our values, we walk the talk? Are there more rewards and there is punishment? And is there transparency in the organization in terms of what people are trying to achieve? When we find companies that need turnaround, none of these are in place. And all four pillars must be balanced in order for there to be the value and the loyalty that's going to come from a guest that's really satisfied, which from there you see an increased traffic, increased sales, increased profits, and ultimately positive outcomes. So let me move into the conditions and circumstances one would find in a turnaround. First off, it's chaos. And the chaos is a result because no one knows what's really happening. Now, how does chaos appear? Some companies are like that frog boiling in the pot of water that starts getting warmer and warmer before they know they're dying because it's too hot. Other companies have some significant events like what happened with Chipotle when they had food poisoning and all of a sudden sales dropped by 30%. Other companies all of a sudden go from one quarter to the next quarter, and in that pivotal shift, their sales may drop or the traffic may drop significantly, which gets people nervous. You hear this in the public company transcripts all the time about, oh, it was the weather, it was the way Easter fell this year. The great brands don't talk about that. It doesn't affect them because, not that they're totally immune, but because they understand what they're doing and how it relates to their guests, they're able to continue in spite of external circumstances. In a turnaround, the first 90 days are absolutely critical. They're probably the most critical things that you can do. And what we're going to explore going forward are some of the things you can take, into regard as steps to turn this business around. There will also be a lot of denial. For whatever reason, cultures do not like to accept responsibility for why things are wrong because they feel they may get fired or they'll feel personal culpability. And we see this a lot. Therefore, there's a lot of focus on the external conditions. And while the external conditions are valid, they cannot be the sole reason. We have to own the fact that our behaviors are creating certain outcomes, and we have to be willing to take an honest, assessment of those behaviors and then change them. When that happens, there can be true change in the business. The other thing as a leader is you can't muscle it. You can't do it alone. I mean, even if you're in a single restaurant, you can't do it alone, much less in a larger chain. You need to get the people around you, the right people, helping you move in the right direction to get things taken care of. And recognize that there will be fear. And we're going to spend a little bit of time on this in the next couple of slides, talking about how do you address this? Why do you need to overcome it? Because if you don't, you'll never get the buy-in from people and the work in the positive direction to what you need to do. And as I mentioned earlier, manage the emotions first, then move quickly and decisively. So, Jim, why don't you talk a little bit about some of your experience in turning around and what it requires?
Yeah, so Fred started out by on the previous slide talking about some of the conditions that you're going to that are typical with a turnaround, and a lot of them are people related. Things like fear and the kind of chaos that grips a business. In some cases, I've heard it described as deer in the headlights. So no one knows what to do, and so they just freeze and don't do anything. So it's why it's often helpful in a turnaround to bring in someone who has had experience with it in the past, because there really are. It's really a different way of operating, and kind of a different mindset. So one of the key things is to ensure that you have the right people. Part of what happens as companies start to get further and further into a turnaround situation is some good people may jump ship, or people who were previously effective can no longer be effective, or people turn sour. And people who otherwise have a upbeat, fine disposition just turn sour and negative, and they get very doomsday. So making sure that you know who you have and that the team are people that can work with you as you start to fashion the turnaround is a key thing, because as Fred said, this is a team effort. There are, 3 different types of people. It has been said, there are lions, and those are people who make things happen. Elephants, those are the people who wait to be told what to do. And then there are hippos. 99% of their bodies are underwater, and what they're doing under there is, quietly undermining your efforts. So you want to make sure that you identify everyone and categorize them, and then make sure that if you have any hippos, that you move them on, because they're going to work against your efforts to improve the morale of the team and to execute your turnaround plan.
Right, good. And so the key, of course, is kill the hippos and then deal with HR separately. So you got to become a hippo hunter. The people that are not on your side, you got to get them off as quickly as possible. So Jim, let's talk about aligning the team and the importance of that.
Yep. So, kind of alluded to before that, what you first need to do in a turnaround is assess the situation. So determine what the nature of the problems are, what the cause of the problem is, and this is all really important because the plan that you fashion, to recover from the turnaround, recover from the downturn, but the turnaround plan is going to largely be a reflection of or impacted by the current situation, how the problem's developed, what the state of the business is now. But the other part of that turnaround plan is going to be recognizing what you have. What can you do with it? What are the unique? Where can the company go that is achievable and differentiated? What position can you stake out for yourself that is going to give you a competitive edge over competition? And developing that vision and that plan is the key to starting the turnaround. The next step is once you have something that you think is defensible and is going to create a meaningful, different business versus competitors, is to communicate that vision. Communicate that vision clearly and frequently with the team. And that communication can be in the form of talks, it can be in the form of meetings, it can be in the form of written communication. It really doesn't matter, and it really should be all of those things. And then it needs to be repeated frequently, because people don't get it the first time. Some people don't get it the second time, and some people don't even get it the third time. So it's important to be as much in front of your team as possible, providing a description or discussion of the vision, and and what the timeline is for change, and why this is going to succeed, what everybody's role is in that. And then that gets us to this last piece about creating a culture that echoes and executes the mission. So, part of getting people aligned, part of getting people behind this plan is to get them emotionally invested in it. And so if your plan is, like in the case of Brugger's, where we viewed ourselves, each one of our units, as a neighborhood bagel bakery. Since that's how we viewed ourselves, and since that's how we wanted to our team to view us, one of the things we did was we gave every manager, assistant manager, 8 hours a year paid to volunteer in their local community. And it could be in any kind of social, charitable cause that they chose to support. So it created individuality between the different bagel bakeries, depending upon where they were located, and it also created a feeling amongst managers and assistant managers that we truly were part of the community. Because they were doing things to invest themselves in the community. So we were creating a culture, or that initiative helped to reinforce a culture that echoed our mission, and therefore helped us execute that mission.
That's great. And Benny was the CEO of a very large Burger King franchisee, and so we had a chance to work together. And part of that, in terms of how to make it work, because this is hard work, this is not easy work, is we were able to come up with a process that would turn out to be very effective, which we're going to show you some of the results. So Benny, why don't you talk a little bit about that first step of engaging those employees?
Yeah, and I think, leading back into what Jim said as well, I think one of the critical points is really being honest with yourself and really looking at each individual employee, making sure you do have the right team. And you may have to bring in some support outside to help you through that process, which we did and brought in results through strategy that kind of helped manage that process to make sure we were being honest, because that was the first real big step, is getting your right team in place. Once you do that, then you start that culture of building that culture, and what do you want it to look like? What do you really want to say to every single employee, all the way down to the hourly employee? So we implemented the 3 steps of engaging your team. And basically what that is simply, the first one is really getting involved and making sure that every single crew member is feeling appreciated, feeling part of what that is, that organization. We often ask ourselves in the QSR industry, why would an hourly employee making, $10,000 to $13,000 a year really care? And they're facing the customer every single day. And that's why you got to get in there, get to know them, and get to understand them, and really make them feel appreciated. And that's the first step, is really getting down to every level of the organization. If you walk into a restaurant or whatever dining restaurant it is, make sure that you talk to every single level in that organization, not just this one time, put it up and that's it, you leave it. It's something you have to live every single day and get them involved and make them feel appreciated. The second one is make sure that at all levels, why does their job, their specific job, matters? And it really ties into the guest journey. It ties into exactly what, whether you're the sweeper, whether you're taking your porter, making the sandwiches, there's a reason why their job matters, and they have to understand that. And everyone in the organization has to put that culture in place to say, this is why your specific job matters, and this is why it's important. And then the last one, which is extremely important, obviously, is measurability. You have to make sure that you have blocks to understand that the sandwich maker is being measured today, doing those hours that they're working on these specific items. And it's something, sometimes you might have to put tools in place, new technology, to put tools in place to understand how can you drill down by cashier behavior, how can you measure them. And by doing these 3 steps, and you're really talking about it, not just one time, as I said, but really drilling it into every conversation, every meeting, every rally that you have, and really that will drive the results if you keep going through these 3 steps.
That's great. Thank you, Benny. So now that we've got the right people, we got the vision and alignment, it's time to take action. So Jim?
Yeah. So the key to kind of feeding into what Benny just said, empowering the team is key to execution. And so we now we're going to look at ways that the team becomes empowered. We think we provide tools to make the vision reality. Those tools are things like the brand positioning, making sure that we have a defensible and strong brand, the innovation, in product, making sure that we can deliver the position that we have staked out for ourselves in the form of the product that we have developed. So if we're in the case of Bruegger's, we decided that we were going to upscale. And by the way, we did, we did similar things when we were running Sbarro. We decided we were going to upscale the product, improve the recipes, and create a much more fast casual experience. And so that was our vision. So we made sure that we executed that vision through new product innovation. Likewise, in the restaurants themselves, you can't deliver a fast casual experience if the restaurants are old, tired, and run down. So in the case of Bruegger's, we had very old, tired, and run down restaurants that we then decided to renovate, and that provided a real shot in the arm for the teams and the managers, because they now are working in these nice environments that were just freshly renovated instead of tired, run-down, maybe even in disrepair kind of environments. And so we talked a little bit before about all stakeholders. You want to make sure that that you have in mind not just your customers, but also your team members. A large part of delivering a great experience is creating an environment for team members that makes them want to deliver that experience. There used to be something, Nation Restaurant News used to have an award called the Spirit Award, and that award recognized concepts that created an environment that caused or empowered their team members to deliver a great experience. Brugger's happened to win that award one of the years that I was running it. So these things are really important, and we talked about financial reports before, how important it is to keep track of where you are in terms of cash, and over communicate. We talked about that as well. You cannot communicate the mission and be in touch with your team members more frequently. And lastly, this is an important point. You have two chances to make an impression. You have the first impression, delivering and doing everything as it's supposed to be done. And then, of course, if something happens that you fall short, you've got a second chance to make it right. You can deliver a memorable experience either way. You can deliver a memorable experience if you do it right the first time. But even if you mess up and don't do it right the first time, if your team members are empowered to do it right the second time, to fix it so that it's right the second time, you can still deliver, you can still recover and deliver a great experience.
That's great. Well, thank you. So, Benny, let's get into a little bit about some of the work you did in the last 20 minutes or so that we have, so everyone can see the benefit of the case study.
Yeah, and I talked about the 3 steps of engaging your team. Well, it really now is talking about, walk the talk and really live in this culture that you have put in place. And so what we did at GoCo is basically, and this is carried out at every meeting, which I'll get into on the rallies, but employee engagement. Make sure that's a speak up. That people are not scared to talk up if they don't like something, or if they'd like to see something change, or, celebration. So think about that, the identity of ownership, making sure everybody has ownership, accountability is what it's all about, and put things in place to support that. And then, of course, the big one is growth, really talking about advancement, really trying to retain people inside the organization and give them a path to say, there's steps that you can take to move up. And that goes a long way into the culture that we've moved ahead. Now, the next step is team building. Really, this was really that led into, okay, let's hold everybody accountable, but we're going to also pay you for your results. So what we did, we broke it out into leading indicators. And the leading indicators were basically for restaurant managers all the way down to the hourly crew members. And basically we set the incentives around that they would be paid monthly bonus incentives around the leading indicators, because this is what they can do, and they can do it very well if they focus just on these items. So the first one was speed of service. More throughput, we know gets more sales. So we put that in place. Upselling. We know if the cashier's engaged, we care about them, and we really have them focused on what they should be doing, whether they're selling more cookies, selling more combos, whatever it may be. If you hit the target, we're going to pay you all the way down to the hourly crew member. Not only we're going to pay you monthly. Then total labor budget. Having the right labor, right? Not too short, not too much, but really using a par level and managing that manpower guide to make sure that we have the right people, the right number of people, and then making sure that we have the right talent as well that goes along with that. And then when you start talking about total labor budget, it also includes, the fringe benefits, the vacations, as well as some of the payroll taxes. As we all know, if you retain your people, you have lower turnover and less unemployment claims, which your rates get better, which was the case for GoCo. And then, of course, one important piece with all of it comes together is training and accountability, ensuring that they're training their people and not just trying to hit these targets, but really taking that lead in to train them effectively and making sure you're following the process to get them trained so they can move up. Once you implement that and you put the incentives in place from the restaurant managers all the way to the hourly crew members, then what should follow is the lagging indicators, which is top line sales and bottom line profitability. Well, that's where the above restaurant leaders, district managers and above, had a monthly bonus incentive around that. So if we had the restaurants focusing on the leading indicators of what they can do every day and they do it very well, then we should see the sales and profitability. In this case, we did. The next one is people. As I said, people is the most important, getting them to believe and trying to move, in my case, 1,400 hearts and minds all in one direction and with one goal. And in some cases, we had to put new tools in place to make sure that we could actually track and have trackability all the way down to the cashier behavior, whether it was upselling or other things. And then, of course, I talked about training and employee engagement. Then when you look at the monthly rallies, this is where you really brought it all together. This is where you live that culture every single month, every day. And we had rallies that was very transparent where all 46 of the restaurant managers came in. It was a full day affair from 9 to 5. We brought in outside support sometimes like RTS, Results Through Strategy. The meeting was strategic, it was very open. Where's the company today? Where do we need to go? What do we need to do differently? It's very educational. We did breakouts, action plan building. Once you do all of that, then everybody's behind it. You know where you're going. You attack that every meeting, and then basically it's team building where you build that synergy of excitement, people being part of GoCo, people being excited where we're going, what we're doing. And it worked, and that was the strategy of the overall culture that we did in the turnaround of GoCo.
Now, one of the things that some people on the webinar you think, well, this is all back to basics, heard this, do this, done that. But the reality is that in many cases it's not being done. And the thing we want to just briefly share with you, Benny briefly said that there was an incentive plan where all employees got bonus. And that was probably one of the most dramatic changes, is to make sure that all the employees were aligned to this, have the same objectives. And when Jim talked earlier about aligning the team to a shared vision, that includes the hourly employees because they're the ones on the front line. And so, Benny, how much was the peak bonus we paid out in 1 year to those employees?
Yeah, so the peak bonus in 1 year, and we budgeted, and we told them, look, up front, we're budgeting this. It's here for you if you hit these targets. And it was $625,000.
All right, so that's some serious money. So if you were checking your emails and you heard us right, that's what the number was, over $600,000 in paid bonus to employees to help them, get the results. And so what I want to share with you very briefly is how that was done. And part of it, Benny explained, so there's the whole idea of lead and lag measures. There's a book called The 4 Disciplines of Execution that I recommend you read, and this is how it is. So the lead measures are things that you can do and monitor every single day. So in the case of Benny, if it was speed of service, drive-through time, shift labor, lag measures are things that measure the goal. And we are always looking for the lag measure, but what we forget to do is recognize the behaviors that lead to the lag measure, and that's what this changes. So the model here is that you can't lose weight by, staring at your toes, standing on a scale. The thing you can only do are do things that are predictive and influenceable. How much you exercise, how much you diet. So if you measure these things and incentivize these things, you will actually move the scale. And in this book, he gives an example that if you have a rock you want to lift, your lever is the lead measure, it moves it up. And so in the case of GoCo, we said these are the things that we're going to measure every single shift, drive-through times, upselling, speed of service, things like that, and then at the same time, you got this money to make as a big bonus. It's going to be modified by the lag measures. And the lag measures, which is what we want, sales growth, profit growth, would offset any bonus that they would have earned. But it turned out to be very, very powerful. And here's some examples of lead and lag measures. The lead measures, indicators are things that you can monitor shift by shift by shift. The lag are the things that you want. That's truly what you're going to focus on. But we sort of flipped it a little bit based on some of the information in this book. And essentially, what we're really saying here, besides all the hard facts of what you need to do, is that you need to have this emotional connection with your employees to capture your hearts and minds. As Benny said, 1,400 hearts and minds that he want to move in the same directions. And that was the big upset there. In terms of turning around that whole business, and it was fairly dramatic. And so let's take a look at the results quickly, Benny.
Yeah, and if you look at early 2014 in the purple, and you can see the negative trend And by the way, this trend was, even earlier. It was back in the 2013 as well, and we knew that we had to face it and be truthful with ourselves and said, how do we turn this around? So we put the strategic turnaround GOCO plan in place at mid-2014, and as you can see in the brown of 2015, the numbers started changing, and it happened all the way throughout the year. And in 2016, in the red, it continued, and this chart doesn't show it, but it actually stayed positive all the way through December of 2016 as well. And then, when you look at the comparable sales in 2015, coming off negative in 2013 and 14, but 2015 was 5.6%, and then, in 2016, 4% lift in sales, which equated to over 30 consecutive months of positive same-store sales. Now, one of the things that I talked about was, measurability, but really putting some things in place. And one of the things we saw that has an opportunity, it may be small, but it was something that we know we can move the needle on if the cashiers was focused, and then we can put an incentive around it on leading indicators. And as you can see, in 2014, we averaged selling 9 cookie sales a day per restaurant. In 2015, we started focusing on it, put the parameters of leading indicators around it, incentives around it, really got people measured on it, 50 cookies a day, and then in 2016 sustained and even went up a little bit more to 55. Now, when you talk about it, it's like, okay, well, you can make all those sales and profit if you add labor. Well, the problem was we had too much labor in the restaurants and we wasn't utilizing it properly in the right place. So what we did, we put a par level system in place, which everybody's familiar with, I'm sure, and basically said, let's get this down to a science of exactly what's needed to take care of the guests, to get them satisfied and make it right. We put budgets around that to make sure we had the right mix in place. And as you can see, the results, which turned into tremendous flow through on the financials. Speed of service, the other big one that was, 63, 65% of the business in a Burger King is through the drive-through. So throughput is extremely important. Not only just starting to focus on it, but having the right tools in place as well. Make sure you have a good measurement tool that, you really focus on, and then put the leading indicative incentives around it as well. As you can see, in 2014, we averaged over 5 minutes, ending up in 2016 just under 3 minutes, which is, accounts for the 30 consecutive months of same-store positive sales as well.
So as you can see by this example, it's a combination of increasing top line while at the same time increasing the bottom line through a combination of controls, more efficiency, but we cannot underemphasize how critical having the engagement of the employees will turn out to be. Because without them, we would not have gotten these results. And I've got to say that when I presented this to the board to say this is something that we wanted to do, they said, fine, go with it, because it was self-liquidating. That $600,000 of bonus came out of betting how many millions of dollars in increased cash flow.
Yeah, so we were $4 million. It was about 460 basis points that we increased the bottom line EBITDA from 2014 all the way to 16, and it was just tremendous amount of results and having that flow through the synergy around the people.
Well, great. Well, thank you. So let's just recap a little bit about what we've talked about. Number one is, you stay focused on reality. Make sure you're asking the right questions. And one of the questions that we were asked is, how do you find the hippos? And the hippos are the people who are undermining you to try and hide. You see the little ears wiggle, but you don't see them doing overtly. But if this is where you're having that one-on-one communication is important, all right, where you're really talking to them to find out what's doing it, and you watch the behavior. Jim, do you have any thoughts on that you would add in terms of the hippos? That was one of the questions we had.
Yeah. So what we employed was we relied upon the general managers, restaurant managers who work with the vast majority of the team members to help us identify people. And we employed a strategy, I think originally Jack Welch talked about, and every year asked the general managers to identify their top 20, their bottom 20, and then the middle 60. The top 20 are people you tried to retain. The bottom 20 were people that you tried to move on, and the middle 60 were those that you tried to coach. And so we really relied upon the general managers to identify for us those people who weren't buying into the culture, weren't contributing, weren't those people that we wanted to keep.
Great. Thank you, Jim. and then alignment was brought up in terms of why it's important to make sure everyone is reinforced that. And when you put in the right kind of financial controls and reporting, that alignment is going to come by showing people performance metrics. Many companies don't have good reporting systems that go to all levels of the organization. The next one had to do with empowerment, giving people the right tools and systems and the focus to really extend their efforts importantly. And Jim, I think, did a very nice job explaining it. And then finally, we talked about the incentive. If you can include every employee in the company in terms of moving your business in the right direction, you'll get there much faster than trying to do it A, by yourself or just with the managers. Because general managers and managers can only hit so many guests, but the employees are the ones that interact with guests every single day. And it's important to note. And we're going to get into our Q&A, and as we get into the Q&A, we had a question of whether the Burger King results were because 3G drove operational improvements after their acquisition. Benny, you want to take that one, please?
Yes, I do, and that's very true, and it was a focus on one of the pillars of moving operationally for the brand itself. However, we saw early on in early 2014 at GoCo that this was a huge opportunity, and it wasn't until late 2015 when 3G implemented the actual new tool of measurability with speed of service. So we actually had a head start, and I think that resulted in the overall sales that you saw on the chart that we showed you.
Yeah, in fact, corporate was going to Gold Coast saying, what in God's name are you doing? Because you're going from the bottom of the pile to the top. And so in many respects, Gold Coast set the standard that was spread out to the rest of the company. The other question we have is, were any tools used to find the operational improvements, employee and otherwise? So Benny, why don't you talk about the BI system we implemented?
Yeah, I mean, so one of the things, I mean, we really wanted to measure every single employee, and that was huge because, and really understanding if we had the right teams in place. But outside of that, you want to simplify it. You don't want to have too much complication there. So we actually had things where they can actually track right there in drive-through. And then, as I said earlier, you had the measurability, so you even had the team members in the back kitchen kind of really geared and focused around making sure that they understand what the goal is on speed of service, whether it's the lunch peak period or whether it's another time frame within that the day part.
That's great. Again, does anyone have any more questions? We'd be happy to answer them for you. Okay, the question is, what do you do if an executive team member decides to move on who is important to the culture? That's a good question, because the question relates to the cultural impact versus maybe just their role and function. But what I'll say to you, and I'll let Jim add to this as well, is if they're leaving because they don't believe in what you're doing, then they're not really being additive to the culture. And while they may have been popular within a culture, they may not be someone that's going to help you move the business forward into a different direction. Jim, do you have any thoughts to share about that?
I think that's exactly right, Fred. I think that, my experience has been that if you, that people who have stayed around through all of the trouble, if you create a vision that, is really workable and meaningfully different, and you do a good job of communicating that and building, the team, building the team's support around it, you won't lose people. I mean, you might. We did in one occasion lose somebody, but to Fred's point, they weren't really. They hadn't bought into it, and they weren't really going to be they were going to be more of a hippo than they were anything else. And on another occasion, another company, we lost somebody, but it was several years after we were already had successfully executed, and that person wanted to go off and do something else with their lives. But I think just to repeat, if you build a great vision and get the support around it, I don't think you're going to lose somebody who's going to be valuable to the culture.
And I'd like to comment too, Fred, if you don't mind. And I had this in my situation doing the GoCo turnaround with a key strategic player that had been with me a long time. And, in the business, it does happen. They move on, and for various reasons, it could be personal and whatnot. And it was we made it as a celebration when he did decide to leave. And it was a big factor because he was a big team player. but we made it a celebration amongst the team during one of the rallies, and to make sure that everybody understood that, yes, we're cheering him on for his new, endeavor that he wants to do, but he is going to be missed, and we're gonna fill that slot. So it does happen, and you got to kind of put that twist on it, and it was a positive twist when it ended up.
That's great. Well, good. You added a good element there. So again, we want to apologize for the little technical glitch that we had through the GoToWebinar platform. However, we were able to do it. We appreciate you hanging in there. We will get a copy of this once we edit out the first part that was just slides but no sound in the next couple of days. And thank you so much. And remember that the Results Through Strategy puts on ongoing webinars, and also on our website, all the previous webinars that we've had are up there for your viewing at any time you'd like to do that. Thank you very much, and hope you have a wonderful day.